I wanted to really talk about today and really what the innovation we've done as we've developed the organisation, but to really talk about engaging with markets and consumers, because that's something more and more in our minds and should be for farming as well. So do follow us on Twitter and tweet, send some pictures, thanks. Hopefully this will work. Maybe it won't. I'll have to stand here. So the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association is a community interest company. We're a community of farmers. We're completely farmer-led. We started in 2011, round a kitchen table, a few farmers, and we're now 515 farmers right across the country. And really we came together to champion the cause for grazing animals out in fields and all of the benefits that they provide for the landscape, for society, and for humans that eat the produce. And we've come together as an organisation, a very skinny organisation. We haven't got many staff at all. It's me and my secretary. But we're built around an idea of sharing knowledge in a community of farmers passionate about grazing. So one of the things we have is a very active online forum. And I see some of our members here. They'll know what I mean. Lots of things are discussed on that forum, and that's farmers sharing knowledge. It's not selling knowledge or transferring knowledge, but it's farmers sharing knowledge from one to the other about how they're making it work on their farms and what they're doing. So that's what we're sort of built around. And some of the physical events we do are things like our study tours and farm walks, again, where we're encouraging farmers to really share about what it is they do, how they make it work, and what journey they've gone along to change the way that they've farmed. But we take that through as well to do training and workshops around producing animals fit for the market and understanding what those market requirements are and how we achieve good carcass grades and suitable for what the emerging markets are looking for. And furthermore, as an organisation, really doing work around lobbying, and now we're bigger, over 500 members. We are making the case to government, and we had George Eustace out onto one of our farms recently to make the case for grazing livestock and the pastoral landscape in future government policy, because there's a lot of people out there that are suggesting other things, and it's really important that as farmers we demonstrate the value to government of what we're doing, and so we're very much engaging in that and trying to influence how future policy will support grazing farmers. But a question to you, who is it that actually decides how we manage our farms? Is it us as the farmers making decisions on a day-to-day basis? Is it government policy influencing how we manage our farms? Well, for us, it's actually these guys, the consumers, because they're voting with their pound notes when they're in the shop and they're making choices, and when they're buying produce. They're really what's supporting different farming systems and the products that support our rural economy. So as a small organisation, we saw how fundamental it was to engage with this audience, that are a very different audience to farmers, to really make the case for grazing livestock above and beyond speaking to other farmers and above and beyond speaking to government. And that's why we developed a certification mark to recognise animals that are reared entirely on pasture, which we've called Pasture for Life. And it's the UK's only certification mark for 100% grass-fed. And that can include grazed or conserved forage, but actually completely grain-free as well. And I'll tell you a little bit more later why we did that in particular. But that's a badge of recognition that's now been established in the marketplace for a few years, but it's very small at the moment and quite niche, but growing very quickly. We have nearly 100 farmers right across the UK that are adopting this certification scheme and this certification mark. We just launched over in Ireland and Northern Ireland earlier this year, so we're starting to move over there now as well. And there's been really a growth from the southwest up, and even as far as Orkney, where I went to visit our farm up there a few weeks ago. There's farmers finding that they can make the principles of grazing and pasture-only feeding year-round, and so it's a really exciting to see how more and more farmers are making it work. And that's about having the right ingredients, the right animal genetics, the right pasture and pasture management, and a healthy soil, and something around how you achieve that healthy soil and monitor a healthy soil to then produce healthy livestock is really key. But those three ingredients are really important. But the number one thing that helps any of these dots appear on the map is the farmer mindset, what's up here, the farmer grey matter, as to how they can make a system work on their farm. And so that's why the knowledge sharing that we facilitate is really important, to equip the farmers as the experts on their farm to make it work. So, why do we say pasture-fed rather than grass-fed? Well, this is grass, and for us this is pasture. And that's really important when you're not reaching for the bag to bring in and supplementary feed your animals. You need much greater diversity in the pasture. And images such as this maybe somewhat have been frowned upon as weedy pasture, unproductive pasture. But of course, like humans, we couldn't just eat bread and milk, say, and we'd survive, but we wouldn't necessarily thrive. And it's exactly the same principle with ryegrass and red clover. Those animals naturally actually need a huge amount more diversity in their diets to survive and thrive just off pasture. So this sort of thing is a really common sight on our farms, where there would be exceeding, say, 25 different species of herbs, forbs, clovers, and grasses. And that can also help with seasonality as well, and extending grazing seasons. Different plants will perform at different times of year at different temperatures. But the other great thing about this image is that it's very attractive to consumers. This is one of our images we use a lot to really engage with consumers and help demonstrate the product they're buying, how it supports greater diversity and benefits for the environment. But as farmers, you'll know that diversity above ground represents diversity below ground. And as we're trying to manage and improve a healthier soil, it's really actually very beneficial to have that diversity above ground, to encourage deeper rooting depths, to tap into new minerals and new soil profiles, with bringing up nutrients that can feed those animals that might have otherwise been unavailable. And again, that's really helpful for feeding our livestock cheaply and sustainably. This is ryegrass here, by the way. And this is actually some of the grass species on the American prairies, which can grow a lot taller. But even now in the UK, we've got farmers exploring how they can grow grasses and other plants, such as chicory, that are growing up to head height. And that's giving them so much more forage per hectare, so much more dry matter to make use of, and replicating a rainforest system with different levels of pasture and forage, but then so much biomass below ground as well. And of course, as we think about how we can put more carbon into the soil in the bigger climate change discussions, this is how we do it. This is how it's getting rooting plants deeper into ground and building more soil and more humus, putting more carbon in the soil. This has huge potential. And in the prairies of America, there are feet and feet of beautiful topsoil that's been built there through animals grazing over generations and generations for millennia. That's built that soil through systems such as this, where pasture has had long rest, and then it's been grazed and then been rested for a long period. I won't talk any more about the technical grazing. If you want to know any more, do come and see me later. We do know as well that from a cost-benefit point of view, pasture, as I'm sure you all appreciate, is a much cheaper form of feed for animals. And at the moment, the picture for profitability in the UK for lowland beef production is not great. It's mostly below the line before subsidies. And that's a really worrying situation as we face uncertain future with agricultural policy, where that's going to go. Costs are higher than our income. But when we've looked at when we've studied this in more detail, and I've got some of these booklets on our stand, which the booklet was called It Can Be Done. We analysed the costs using economic benchmarking from AHDB, and it shows with a lower input, although the productivity might be lower, with a lower input cost, profitability is higher. And the old saying, productivity is vanity, profitability is sanity, and it really stacks up within these figures. But what I really want to get on to is about emerging consumer trends. And of course, it won't have escaped your notice that veganism is very much on the rise in the UK, and that causes major concern for farmers generally. And and it's definitely an indication of a changing trend. We see it as good news, actually, and I'll come to why in a minute. Just a quick straw poll. Who here would eat meat more than 10 times a week, so at least once a day? So most of you. Who would eat meat between 5 and 10 times a week, so maybe not every day? Yeah. Who would eat less than 5 times a week? Any vegans here? Want to admit to it? No, okay. That's fine. We respect anybody choices. That's absolutely up to them. What's really interesting is in the Western world, we are generally eating too much meat. That's a fact. But it also depends what you're doing. And I bet all of you that put your hands up for at least twice a day, you're probably out there, in all weathers, working hard. You need that highly nutritious food. I spend a lot of my time sat at a desk, unfortunately, so I just don't need that level of nutrition. And that's about personal choices, and anybody can make a personal choice. Why do you think there's such a rise in veganism? Anybody want to shout out any thoughts? Why is veganism on the rise? Is it fashionable? Welfare? Climate change? Saving the planet, yeah, all good stuff. Definitely the recent rise is to do with climate change. So there's sort of those welfare things you mentioned and the ethics of it, but climate change is now the number one driver of people turning to veganism. And they're driven by this idea that livestock are responsible for climate change. Now, I bet you're all thinking, yeah, but we know as farmers, especially in Wales, how important these animals are, and that this is absolute bullshit, really, because most of the methane comes out the front end, not the back end. But this image is really driving change, and as farming, we have to address that and put the facts right, because there is a lot of misinformation out there. But at the same time, our livestock are producing methane. So are we going to take responsibility for that, or are we not? And really, as an industry, we should. So, who can tell me which produces more greenhouse gas emissions, transport or livestock? Anyone want to take a guess? You're saying transport? Anyone else want to go the other way? Okay. What do you think consumers think? Those that are not in here. Which do you think they think? They think livestock, exactly. And this is really important. I want, if you take anything away from today, it's these facts as to why this is so mixed up. This was the IPCC report that looked at the emissions from livestock and transport, and it found that direct emissions from livestock were around 5% and 14% for transport. So exactly as you say, you're right. Transport produces more direct emissions. But of course, for both of these things, it's not just about direct emissions. It's about the whole holistic picture, the whole picture, the life cycle analysis. So when you're building a car and sourcing all the raw material and the energy that goes into that, and whilst it's been used, it's directly emitting, but after it's been used, it's scrapped, and that's got to be processed, and that carries an environmental cost and causes emissions as well. You've got to take that into account as well. So they redid this calculation, looking at the whole life cycle analysis and what goes into feed for animals. And then they found that actually it was much higher than the 5%, because all the other things, it's actually 14.5% for livestock. But they got stuck trying to work it out for transport because it's so complicated, and all the things that go into transport and fossil fuel use. Nobody's ever worked it out. But it must be more than livestock. So the problem you get is that people see 14.5% emissions for livestock, and they compare it to 14% direct emissions. But it's not comparing like for like, it's comparing apples with pears. And that's a really good thing. That's on our website if you want to just look at the facts behind that, because if you ever get challenged on that, it's a really important point to make. That's where that misinformation has come from. And so like you all see, I bet the cow in the rumen is a fundamental part of our natural carbon cycle, and it has, long before humans came along and pumping fossil fuels out of the ground, it was part of a cycle, and the cow eating the grass burped out the methane and pooped the poop, which went back into the soil, and the methane in the atmosphere broke down into carbon, and that carbon was then used by those plants to regrow. And that cycle went on for perpetuity. And this is a cartoon by one of our farmers, Christine at Smiling Tree Farm, where this system is seen and explained. However, this natural cycle, which happens in nature, doesn't happen very often at the moment, because new inputs are brought into this system in the form of extra feed or energy for running tractors around and ploughing the earth and releasing carbon out of the earth. So this natural cycle is upset by more higher input farming, if you like. And that's one of the reasons why we set our standards for pasture for life around a really minimal input system, so that this system is replicated as far as possible, and we can actually demonstrate and quantify that these animals are not contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Yes, they're burping out methane, but through our land and our pasture management, we're making sure we reabsorb all of that carbon. And if we can, we've got some research going on. If we can keep measuring it, we can actually show how we can build carbon in the soil and actually be a net sequester of carbon. That has huge potential for agriculture and farming. Just think if we were paid by the airlines to offset their carbon emissions. There's incredible scope with this, but we're only on the cusp of finding out the real potential at the moment. If you want to find out more, do have a look at these resources. Come and see me later. I want to talk a little bit about health. I'm probably running out of time, but this age-old thing about how unpopular fat has become, and actually fat's a very good thing for us to have in our diets, and sugar won over fat because sugar was seen as fine and healthy, and fat lost out to that. Whereas only now people are starting to realise that sugar was the bad thing after all, and we're lacking fats in our diet. That's actually causing problems. I won't be too controversial, but of course sugar is a very high input industry. It's relied on industry and economic growth, so that it was in their interest to push that, whereas nobody could really make money out of fat because it just came with the meat. We've potentially got the same problem happening now because, as you know, red meat is blamed for causing cancer. Red meat doesn't cause cancer. Processed red meat does. And that's because all the chemicals added to it. And again, there's inputs, there's economic growth out of processing meat and adding value and adding chemicals to it that is causing health problems, but actually it's driving economy, and it's in business interest to make that happen. And so getting people back to fresh, unfettered meat and dairy produce is really key to their health. And thankfully there's more and more consumers waking up to that. We've been doing some health research on Pasture for Life certified products and finding there's quite a few things that are of real benefit to human health. In particular, the main one is omega-3s, which you probably know as for oily fish is a great source of omega-3. It's really good for your health, for your brain health in particular. Vegans really struggle to get omega-3 fatty acids in their diet because they're not something we can replicate or turn vegetables and make ourselves. It can only be got from oily fish or from grass-fed livestock. And omega-6 is something which is quite prevalent in grain-fed meat or in plant-based foods, and too much omega-6 can cause health problems. So it's really important you need some. It's important to have the right balance, which I'll come back to in a moment. And those omega-3s come from complex chemicals in plant species that are part of the photosynthesis process. The green chlorophyll helps convert sunlight and sugars into green leafy material, and it's that stuff that works its way back into what the animals eat, works its way into the meat and the milk that they produce. And just to show you the effect of feeding grain to beef animals, this is what happens to the omega-3 levels. There's 3 types of omega-3 measured here, and after months of grazing, those levels actually disappear. In milk, we've also done some research looking at 3 types of milk: conventional, organic, and pasture-fed livestock, at the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. Remember I said omega-6 wasn't so good for you, so a lower ratio is much better. Our farming system works really well alongside organic, and half of our farmers are organic. But as you may know, with organic standards, it's not a requirement to be 100% forage fed, and taking it to that next level shows how that health benefit is further affected. And that is so important to consumers. If we're producing a healthy product, and more of them are looking for this, and it's just, I'm showing what we're finding. I'm not knocking any other system at all, because there's many different reasons why other farming systems work, but these are our findings that I'm sharing of what we're seeing. So can British agriculture deliver these 3 really important things for society, human health, better biodiversity for our environment, and capture carbon. And we've seen the NFU's commitment to make the net zero emissions by 2040. There is huge potential for us as farmers to do that. And the great news is that I want to share with you today is that there are more and more consumers out there, in some part driven by the same ethics and values that veganism's driven by, that are ready to support farming in this way. These are Google trends for people searching for grass-fed in the UK. Google Trends are a cheap and free way to find data about how trends are changing and what consumers are looking for. And it's not actually, it's a sort of percentage change in relative since 2004. So it's sort of quite a rough guide, but there's a clear increase. If we look at the same trend comparison between grass-fed beef and organic beef in the UK, we see that grass-fed has actually really caught up searches for organic beef in the UK. We're taking it one step further and looking at the same globally. We see that searches for grass-fed globally has long since overtaken searches for organic. And again, I'm not knocking organic or saying they're missing out, but this is just showing what the consumer movements are doing and how they're being informed, and they're looking more and more for different things. So the final challenge for us as an organisation, for you as farmers, and for the consumers out there is how do we connect up? How do we connect the farmers on the left, producing the raw product, with the consumers on the right who don't necessarily understand all of this intricacy? How do they get the product they want? And you'll all know that the meat industry is particularly complex, and there's fewer and fewer processors in the middle actually making that work. And it's hard work pushing a message this way up to the consumers through a narrow point, trying to reach out to the consumers. So as an organisation, we've stepped out of that, and now we're confident about the farming system work. We're now jumping ahead to the other end. Rather than pushing what's called push marketing, we're going to focus on pull marketing, which is directly engaging with these guys at the far end, so they start demanding from existing infrastructure, we want to get pasture for life, we want grass-fed produce, we want to know the farmer this came from and know that it was reared well. And this applies to anything, any point of difference that you might be adding. So this summer we launched a film, which I'm going to show you now, to try and engage with the consumer. I hope you'll be able to hear it, but there's subtitles if
If you care about the quality of your meat and dairy, then ask for Pasture for Life next time you shop. Pasture for Life animals are 100% grass-fed and totally grain-free. They graze in wildflower meadows and lush green pastures filled with herbs and grasses. These plants enrich the soil and attract and support insects, birds, and small animals. They also make the cattle and sheep that eat them healthier. And by not eating any grains, their carbon footprint is lower. Living as nature intended means they're less stressed and more relaxed. And a happier life helps create the best meat, milk, and cheese you can buy. With a healthier balance of omegas, vitamins and minerals, and more good fat. You can even taste the landscape. Exceptional flavour, texture, and tenderness. Pasture for Life is a more natural approach that's better for everyone. From field to plate, we're Pasture for Life. Are you?
So there we are, and supported by Patagonia and the Roddick Foundation, who I must mention. Patagonia are the clothing brand, international firm, who've taken a really strong stance on how they source things like cotton and clothing materials, and they're being really supportive of regenerative agriculture now, so they were really glad to have their support. And the Roddick Foundation, formerly of Anita Roddick, the Body Shop, again a very ethical company, really keen to support products from farms that are doing good for the environment. So within that film, we really wanted to create the image. You might have seen very moody to you and sort of very glammed up, but we really took a lot of advice on how we should present the message and to show a happy, healthy family enjoying and having fun. And it's not about telling people you must eat this anymore. It's about showing people the experience they can have through eating a product and feeling very happy and accomplished about what they've done and what they're enjoying. So it's a very different approach to marketing. And as a farmer organisation, we're only just about starting to get into that whole concept of consumer marketing, which is a whole different world. But as I've shown you, there's an emerging interest and demand, and we think the future's very bright. Anyone's very welcome to join us, find out what we're doing. You don't have to be certified to be a member. We're a growing community, and those that want to become certified can make that next step to do that.